Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you have ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. I am your host, Pattie Porter. My guest hosts, Dina Zameta and Stephen Kotev, along with our guest experts, will share our experiences, raise your awareness, and give you food for thought. We will share with you problem-solving strategies no matter what your situation is. At work, with neighbors or friends, family, and with partners. Tune in or join in the conversation every Tuesday evening. Welcome, listeners, to our Conflict Chat. I am your host, Pattie Porter, along with special host, Abby McManus. The last Tuesday of every month, we will highlight conflict-related topics that the ordinary person deals with in their daily lives. You know, things we hear or see in the news, our social networks, or maybe something we experience personally. More importantly, you have an opportunity to call in and ask your question with conflict management experts who are mediators, conflict coaches, and facilitators on how to think about your situation differently, analyze it, or even give you guidance on your next steps to resolve it. Now, this month, we have focused on a lot of issues important to parents as kids return back to school. We invite you now to engage with us in three primary ways. Some of you are already on the line at 347-324-3591. And if you would like to speak with us, press the number 1 key at any time during the show so that we know you want to speak with us. You can also enter the chat room at Blog Talk Radio, and I see that we have a couple of people there as well, and that's blogtalkradio.com/Texas-conflict-coach, and just simply scroll down the page. You'll see the chat room is open. And, of course, we always live tweet on Tuesday nights using the hashtag Conflict Chat, and we'd love to hear your comments and responses there. Now, you can listen to all of our archive programs at texasconflictcoach.com, and thank you again for joining us, listeners. So, Abby, thank you for joining me tonight for our Conflict Chat.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Well, you know, this has been a very interesting month, Abby, because I know we've been doing a lot of work on, you know, back to school. And August is always our back to school series, and there's always some hot topic going on, whether it's secondary school or, you know, kids going into university and being freshmen in college. But today we're going to do something a little bit different, and we're going to talk a little bit about how parents discipline their children for their actions or inactions. And it's often a point of strongly held opinions, right, and debates and even conflict between spouses, grandparents, and even teachers. And so now, you know, what I want to say that neither, so listeners, just to give you a disclaimer, Abby, who is a newlywed, right, and nor I have children, and maybe Abby will in the future, but I don't have children with my husband as well. And so we wanted to have that disclaimer. We're not parental experts. However, as conflict management experts, we have dealt with and listened to certainly many friends, spouses, even things in mediation where this is a point of contention. And although we've cared for and enjoyed our nieces and nephews and our close friends' children, certainly we have been exposed many, many times to these types of fights between married couples and how they think about consequences for their children. And so, Abby, I imagine you've been around a lot of people as well that's you know, how we discipline and in terms of consequences, that's been something you've heard a lot about that we're going to talk about today.
Oh, absolutely. Well, now I just have a baby niece that's about 1 year old now. So she hasn't really gotten into any of the disciplinary actions as of just telling her no. But I've seen a lot of friends and family and close relatives who have younger children. So discipline is definitely a topic that comes up a lot in everyday conversation.
Oh, absolutely. And so, you know, in preparation of today, because, again, the Conflict Chat show the last Tuesday of the month is really about what's going on now, what's hot, what are we finding. And so tonight, Abby, you actually did a little research for us, and you found some information about building stronger parent-child relationships. and that was through the Family Resiliency Education Program at the University of Minnesota. So we'll definitely be giving you listeners some resources. And there was some great information about how to use natural and logical consequences for children. So we're going to explore this. So, Abby, why don't you set the framework for us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple weeks ago, we had a guest on our show, Mark Andreas, and he talked about using natural and logical consequences when dealing with troubled teens. And I was really kind of interested in this just because of consequences and discipline in general has really gone in different ways throughout the course of human history, and how parents discipline their kids. So first, consequences are what help us become responsible people. We do the right things because we don't like the outcomes. If we do the right things because we don't like the outcomes, then we don't. If we make bad choices and there's no bad outcomes, we learn nothing and continue to make those bad choices. So say you make a bad choice, someone argues your innocence and blames someone else, you just learn to be irresponsible. And so I have gathered actually some really awesome examples that I found from Bethel Park School District, and the PDF can actually be found on our website, listeners, under Conflict Chat subpage. So natural consequences occur without any enforcement on the part of the parent. Often allowing the natural consequence to occur prevents the parent-child argument, and the child will learn the right lesson. So a couple of natural examples, not natural consequence examples, is a child argues there's no homework tonight, and then the next day they actually have to face the teacher and peers if they do have homework, and they just didn't do it. Another example of a natural consequence was the child wants to put too much stuff in their book bag, and then the natural consequence would be they have to carry it. So that's just one example of the natural consequences. So then logical consequences are more along the lines of parents do have to interact with them, but it's more important that it's based off the child's action. So there's more of a choice involved. And some logical consequences that I also got from the Bethel Park website was, for example, if you leave toys all over, toys get a timeout. Or if you don't eat a reasonable dinner, then you don't get a snack, a midnight or an evening snack, or a dessert. Or breaking curfew results in grounding. So it's just any kind of logical consequence that you can enforce that would make sense to a child, and it can be based off of their choices.
Okay, so I appreciate you giving the context for natural and logical consequences, and again, really great resources, folks. Listeners, again, if you have a question or comment about how you use these types of consequences when your child is misbehaving, please feel free to press 1 if you're on the phone, or certainly in the chat box. You can type right in the rectangular box and hit enter, and we'll see those comments and questions. So what do you recollect, Abby? Now, of course, Abby, you're younger than I am. But what are your own recollections, about how your parents disciplined you in terms of the kinds of consequences? Did they tend to lean toward the natural consequences or the logical consequences?
So my parents took the more liberal standpoint. I don't have a lot of recollection of me getting punished for things. And if I did get punished, this is actually kind of funny. There were times I actually would punish myself. I would, put myself in timeout, or I'd put myself in my room if I did something wrong, because I used to feel really, really guilty. The only thing I can really remember is having things taken away from me by my parents, and that was more, I guess, the logical consequence. If I was doing something wrong, or if I was pestering my brother or something, the logical consequence would either be to separate us or to take away the toy that we were arguing over, or something along those lines.
Yeah, so it sounds like more the natural consequences. But something you just said is that was really important, and that is in this research and this information from the Family Center that we just referenced in the University of Minnesota. They were saying that what's powerful about natural consequences, or even, logical consequences, is when they're given a choice, when the child themselves is given a choice about their own consequences, they tend to give themselves harder consequences than the parent would. And so now in my generation, now I'm in my 50s. I was raised by my grandmother, so she, of course, was, she was born in 1920, so they had the iron hand and the belt and all of that. So theirs was sometimes not, I don't think necessarily logical all the time, but more so logical consequences. I think there are natural consequences that happen anyway, but it was a different time and era in how we, discipline children. And oftentimes I would find myself, being harsh for myself as a consequence as a child. But one of the questions that we can talk about is why can natural and logical consequences be effective for children? So let's talk about that just a little bit. So I'm going to go back to one of the things that came out of this research and out of this education. There's a lot of research. This is just one source of many, listeners, and that is letting the child make that choice. So people are like, well, what do you mean letting the child make the choice? If you say, look, this is what's going to happen. If you don't come in for dinner, by a certain time, then you can you'll either go to your room without dinner, or you have to so you give them A or B and then let them make the choice. Now, it's a forced choice, but it still allows them to make a choice that is a consequence to the actual misbehavior that they're not doing. And so part of that, what they talked about is why is it effective, is it has to be linked very closely to the behavior that you're trying to correct. And it gives the child a chance to learn what happens when he or she doesn't behave in the way that you expect them. So part of it is making sure that consequence is tied to the behavior and in a timely way. Oftentimes you hear parents who'll, a week later, you'll get some punishment for something that happened a week ago, and they're like, well, why are you bothering me now? And what comes up for me, Abby, is even in the workplace as adults, how many times has, an employee done something wrong, and a month later the manager's giving them a write-up, hey, you're getting this write-up, and they're like, hey, why are you waiting a month to give me a consequence? It doesn't make sense. It's not timely. It doesn't make sense. And especially for a child, you're wanting them to correct behavior.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important. One of the things that they stress in the article is that in giving a logical consequence, you have to make sure that it's enforceable, that it, like you said, it makes sense and that you can enforce it. And also that by doing this, by giving the kid the option of a choice that is ultimately going to lead to a consequence, they feel more empowered and they can maintain their self-respect, which I thought was very interesting because it wasn't just about children maintaining their self-respect, it was also the parent maintaining their self-respect.
Well, and I'm glad you said that because it also talks about, a lot of times parents will, and I hear this a lot, and this becomes a really bone of contention between two different parent styles of how they discipline children. Some parents will discipline their belief, whether it's their cultural belief, the way they grew up, their religious belief, which is you shame and you punish and you threaten the child with a consequence, which doesn't provide a positive way to correct the behavior, but it's way in what shames the child. And so then that child will then develop some type of, fear to the parent. And then other parents whose belief and style is how do we separate the deed from the doer? How do you separate the behavior from the doer so you're not blaming, shaming, or labeling? And we even talk about that many times in mediation. How do we separate the people from the problem instead of saying, hey, you lazy child or you lazy adult, you identify the actual behavior that's unacceptable, and then you do it in a way that's calm so that the child learns, from that experience. Anything else you wanted to say about that, Abby?
No, I absolutely agree. I think it's very important that, making sure that it's a logical consequence and making sure it sticks closely to what they did. And like you said, you can't you can't put a consequence on something and then, most importantly, not stick to it. That was something else I thought was very important, because I can recall my mom trying to enforce a punishment with my brother, and then my brother used to just bother her so much, consistently about it, that she would end up just giving in and letting him do whatever, because she just was sick of him bothering her. And that didn't help matters at all, or help him learn his lesson. He just learned that when I don't want to stick out a punishment, I can just keep pushing her buttons until she lets up. So it's also a lot about maintaining and being, sticking with stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's like who can, it's like the battle, it's the power battle, like who can, hold out through the crying and wailing and tantrum of a child. You say, here's the consequence, you implement the consequence, like, no TV, or, take your phone away, or, no toys, and then they cry and cry and cry and cry, and some of them can go for a long time, and you're like, okay, all right, okay, here's your toy, here's your smartphone, wait, because they can't stand it, and you have to not only stick to your guns, but you have to really hold true, and that takes a great deal of patience. You're the adult, they're the child, and they're going to use their emotional skills that they've developed at that level of child's development, where you have hopefully learned as a parent, however old you are, on how you just have to really, really take a few deep breaths and just really, maintain your guns and be consistent. Before we go on, let's just let listeners know you are tuned into the Texas Conflict Coach radio program, and it is our monthly conflict chat where we invite you to bring your situation to us. And again, if you're in the chat room or on the phone, press the number 1 key. Or if you're in the chat room and you want to call us at 347-324-3591 and pose your question or your comment. And we invite you to follow us on Blog Talk Radio and Twitter at TX Conflict Coach. Now, a couple things before we talk about, well, how do we apply this? Some steps, for example. There are some things that if you are going to be using natural and logical consequences, that you have to really be thinking ahead. If you aren't thinking ahead and coming up with a proper response, we talk about this all the time when we're dealing with conflict management, is when we're triggered, we usually react very impulsively, and usually it's not in a very negative or constructive way. And so think ahead of some of the common issues, ongoing problems you have with a child's behavior. Let's say you've been working on a particular behavior about, doing your homework, or going to bed at a certain time, or playing, watching certain television. There's all kinds of things. Think of a common issue you've been dealing with. And how have you been behaving and reacting to your children? And think about that. And now say, if I was to use a natural logical consequence, how would I want to be different? What would be a proper or constructive or more positive logical consequence, like giving a choice, in a way that's a calm manner? Think about what you would say to yourself and think what you would say to your child in response, and practice that. So when it happens, you are already practicing and thinking ahead and being prepared. So you're actually responding versus reacting. So that's one thing. And the other is, I don't know, sometimes I think that we want to jump in too quick, right? The parent wants to save the child. The typical thing is, you want to protect the child from burning their hand on the stove. I remember, my grandmother, talking about the stove. I remember as a child, we had a really big stove and an oven. And I remember when I was tippy-toeing and, reaching for the stove. I actually have a physical memory of that, reaching to the stove, and my grandmother would slap my hand and, it's hot, right? And then the next time it would happen, it would be like, okay, does she go in and save me? Obviously, she doesn't want me to get hurt. So this might be an extreme example. Or do I touch my finger and then I'm like, oh, my God, I just got burned, and then it's a natural consequence, because now I know I will never touch that stove again when it's hot. So one of the things that people say is, at what point do we allow the child to experience the consequence, like the natural consequence, so that they can learn this is what the consequence is? Now, I don't mean you go to a place where the child is injured. That's not what we're talking about here. But allowing them to make those mistakes and learn from those consequences. I don't know what you're feeling about that, because you might be be thinking already about having kids, just newlywed.
Oh, my wheels are spinning already about that. Me and my husband, this has brought up a lot of points to discuss. But no, absolutely. I think that's a happy like a fine line, because obviously you don't want the kid to get injured. I know one of the examples that the articles I've given was, about letting your kid doesn't want to put on his rain jacket, so when he goes outside and he gets wet. And to some extent, that's an okay consequence. Okay, well, he'll just be wet, and that's the consequence. But then if he gets sick, so it's like I think it's going to just be a very fine line to judge. Obviously, I think if it's going to cause your kid a lot of harm, like, for example, like not wearing a bike helmet, he's fighting you on wearing the bike helmet. Well, it wouldn't be you just let him wear the bike helmet. It would be more or less like the bike gets grounded because he's choosing to not wear the bike helmet. So then that comes into either you can wear your bike helmet and play on your bike, or you can not wear your bike helmet and then you don't get to play on your bike. So those are your options, and it's still a choice.
Yes.
And obviously there's a logical one, but it would be then put on the kid to make that choice.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think
and that's that decision making, that having them learn responsibility is what I'm hearing you say.
And I know what I really love about that is it's putting accountability and teaching your kids to be accountable for their actions. So they know that if they make a choice and it hence happens to be the wrong choice, then that choice solely belongs to them, and they can they can feel more responsible and more empowered by that choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's then talk a little bit about what are some steps that you might consider taking when you're trying to decide, okay, am I using a natural consequence or am I using a logical consequence? And one thing about consequences as you're practicing, and some of you listeners might be brand new parents, maybe you're pregnant, thinking about having kids, or you're already got, 10 and 12-year-olds, and they're getting even more, more challenging, more risky. They're becoming more independent, and they're really challenging parental guidance, right? The thing about consequences is it takes time to put things in action. The younger they are, the more practice you'll have to use until they understand how it works. It's not always going to work the first time. Don't give up. Keep practicing the consequence you're trying to put into place. And then, as I said, the younger child will definitely begin to learn what it all means. So in looking at, so Abby, you and I are going to kind of go over steps for using logical and natural consequences. So I'll start with step one, which is identifying why the child is misbehaving. So if you're trying to decide, okay, is this am I going to put a logical consequence in place, meaning I'm making a choice as a parent versus something that naturally will occur with the misbehavior? Why is the child behaving? What is he or she doing? And try to figure out why. And there's some reasons that why children, are usually misbehaving. They're trying to get your attention. Maybe you're on the phone and they're like, mommy, mommy, mommy. And invariably they don't talk to you all day because they're playing with their Nintendo or Xbox or whatever the new games are of this era. And all of a sudden you get on the phone and now they just want your full attention. And you're like, okay, I'm on the phone. I quiet down, right? Sometimes it's a power, it's a power struggle. And what's the power struggle about? Independence, making their own decisions, wanting to do something they want to do and not be told. Again, this all varies in terms of the age. Maybe they're retaliating. Now, they don't say retaliate. They just want to get even. They were hurt by mom or dad, and they want to get back at them. And so, which just reminds me of something. It was so interesting, Abby. When I was a teenager, I remember I always had long hair. And my grandmother always loved for me to have long hair. Well, I moved with my father and my stepmother, which is a whole nother scenario and a whole nother lifestyle, a whole other culture and all that kind of stuff. And they thought I needed to cut my hair really short. And I was upset. I was not going to let them cut my hair, and I was going to keep it long. And so there's this real power struggle. And they had already cut my two sisters' hairs, and I was next. and I thought, I am not going to have it. And I had this big tantrum. I remember having this huge tantrum in my bedroom. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to leave the house, and I'm going to be gone, and they can't find me. And I remember leaving thinking, I'm getting even with them. I'm making them mad because I'm not getting my hair cut, and, I'm, down the street a couple of blocks, and they don't know where I was. And I thought I was getting even with them, and then like 3 or 4 hours later, I showed back up, and it was like they didn't even they weren't mad or anything. I was going through all that craziness for nothing, But the thing about it is think of how the child thinks. Why are they misbehaving? And sometimes it's because they feel inadequate or insecure, and so they will act up in these ways. So the first step is really try to understand why are they behaving, so you know what kind of consequence you might want to, apply. What would be another step?
So the next step would be to define who is impacted by the problem, to kind of establish whether it would be a natural or a logical consequence. So if it's the child alone, as long as the consequence isn't dangerous, the parent wouldn't interfere. So that would be a more natural consequence. So that would be, like if the kid wants to go outside and play, but it's getting ready to rain, the natural consequence would be to let him go outside and play in the rain, and then when he gets wet, that would be the natural consequence. The other, but if the parent is impacted in some way, if it in any way is a problem to the parent, then it becomes more of a logical consequence where the parent would have to intervene. So an example that was given would be Sam will not put away his toys before he goes to preschool in the morning, and the mom needs him to put his toys away. So at the end of so the mom works with Sam to try to help put the toys away, or tells him he'll take the toys away. She'll take the toys away if he doesn't put them away himself. So then eventually she's trying to work with him to get him to put the toys away. And by establishing choices, that would be a more logical standpoint, or taking the toys away from Sam to begin with so he doesn't leave them out.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of really ties in, hand in hand with step 3 for logical consequences, offering those choices and letting the child choose. Now, don't give them like 4 or 5 choices. Give them 2 choices. And which are the 2 choices, that you're giving? We talked about that already a number of times. So one, you're going to identify why is the child misbehaving, and define who has impacted the problem. Is it a child alone or a parent? So as you're thinking about these things, you're like, what's going to be the consequence I'm going to use? What's step number 4?
So step number 4 would be strong and stand your ground once the choice is named. Don't get wishy-washy or give in to the child's crying or temper tantrum. So we spoke about this already, but it's just making sure that you stay firm in your consequence. If your child chooses a consequence, follow through and don't waver, and make sure they stick to it.
Okay, good. Good. Very, very good. And now the next one is, to step 5 is avoid a power struggle. And by framing the consequence as a choice versus a threat. So we talked about, if you're going to do this, don't shame, blame, label, but already establish that you're the parent, you're the one in authority, and you also have a way of setting this in a positive frame without it being a threat. Now, this really takes some practice. And it can be, I think it's like, you can, what's the thing? You can attract more flies with honey than vinegar. And yet, sometimes we don't have time. We get reactive, we threaten, and you better do this or else, and depending on whether that's, coupled with spanking or, some people still do that, so everyone has different ways of doing this. But if you really want to change the behavior in the long run and avoid that power struggle, the parent really, listener, you need to be positive rather than threatening. So you really have to think about how are you coming off. Ask your spouse, how do I come off when I'm disciplining or giving a consequence or choice, and get some feedback about how you sound if you think that maybe you're not sounding in that way. What would be step number 6?
Step number 6 would be praise the child when he or she corrects their behavior. Even as adults, we really enjoy praise, and we like to be acknowledged when we do good things. And especially a child, if you see that they correct their behavior on their own, tell them they did a good job. Tell them you noticed it or pointed out that you acknowledge it and give them praise for it, because it only will help their self-esteem and build them up and make them proud of the fact that they were able to correct a behavior on their own. They'll feel very empowered by that.
Well, and a lot of times, remember, consequences require practice and constant repetition in order for it to work. So sometimes when you start to see them do that good behavior, and sometimes it's just a quick little reminder, remember what Mommy said yesterday about the truck? And then the child corrects it immediately, then it's just like, wow, that was really great, the way you're putting your toys away or being responsible, however it is that you want to praise the child, but definitely, help the child recognize this is exactly, what I'm looking for, and you're rewarded. And you don't have to be necessarily rewarded with food or money, because, for a lot of children are rewarded with food and money, and that could be all kinds of problems with that. So it could just be the praise and love and hug, of the parent. Did anything come up for you about that, Abby, when I was saying that?
I know as a child, like if I can just recall that if either of my parents noticed when I did something or praised me for something, even if it was something that I changed or didn't do, I remember feeling that it made me feel good that they noticed it, because, and especially nowadays, I think parents are so busy that even showing the slightest bit can help the child, can be a huge impact on the child. So I think making sure that you are acknowledging their good behavior will only help them to continue doing that good behavior.
Yeah, it almost becomes an internal motivator, because as a child growing up, again, my grandmother was very much a strong discipliner. She went through the kind of threat, shame, blame process. But when she did reward, it wasn't like she said, oh, you did such a good job. It was usually with food. Oh, let's go get a hamburger. Oh, let's go get ice cream, right? That's how she taught me the reward. And then I had a problem with food in my adult life. And then when I lived with my father, he wasn't so much into, praising with food or even praising with, oh, I love you, I'm proud of you. He was like, I'm going to buy you a gift, or I'm going to give you money. And so then I learned, okay, so I'm really good. I'm going to get this food item, or I'm going to get money or a gift, which then can turn into another power struggle. It backfires, right? Because then the child learns to be manipulative about that. So again, be careful about rewarding or giving positive acknowledgement other than food and money. The last step that we would recommend is let the child decide the consequence and be part of the decision-making process. And we talked a little bit about that, because you even said, Abby, sometimes that you would have been harder on yourself than what the parents might come up with. Do you remember an example where you were harder on yourself? Or
I think I actually remember one time I broke something on my mom's, and then I glued it back together and hoped that she wouldn't find out. And then she came in, and I think she was close to it, and she accidentally bumped into it or something, and then it broke again. And I remember just immediately starting spilling my guts. And then as soon as I was done, I was like, all right, I'm gutted. I won't go out this weekend, and I won't use the phone. And I just started laying stuff, and I ran upstairs. And my mom was just like, okay. It was the most ridiculous thing. But she even came up later and talked to me, and she was like, that vase was not a big deal. It's okay. It was old. It was going to break anyway. She was like, it was no big deal. But I was so hard and so upset about it that I just couldn't imagine. I just started throwing all these things out there that I was not going to do.
Yeah, exactly. And part of letting the child, there's one way, like we said, you give two choices and then they make a choice from the two choices you provide them. Or, if the child is at such a place and he's in charge of the choices he makes, it could be a good idea to ask him what he or she thinks is a good consequence. Again, think about the age of the child. And even if the child doesn't choose to come up with a consequence, or maybe comes up with a consequence and y'all choose together, at least your child is beginning to think independently, with the parent, and as they're part of that decision making. Again, it builds that accountability. It builds that sense of self-awareness about that actions do have consequences, either positive or negative. And so those would be the 7 steps, and we'll give you the link, listeners, in terms of where you can not only find that information, but another resource. So, Abby, let's start our close, and what are other resources they can get?
So we encourage you to look at how to select a logical or natural consequence that fits the misbehavior, and to be prepared and think ahead. So you can go to the University of Minnesota Extension under the Family Resiliency tab, or you can go to our website under the subheading Conflict Chat, and both the links for the articles that we were talking about tonight are located on that Conflict Chat link. And I also encourage you guys, if you do this and you have success or you have struggles or whatever, please let us know so we can help you out or look at it from a different point of view, just to kind of grow our understanding of this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the University of Minnesota it's simply www.extension.unm.edu, and go to the family tab, and you'll be able to deal with that. And we do invite you to browse our podcast library, and of course, all of our programs are archived, so you can re-listen to this. You can share it with others. It's free. And simply go to texasconflictcoach.com, where you'll see not only our upcoming programs, but you can listen to any of our 290 podcasts that we've done over the last 7.5 years. They're all free, and they're all in user-friendly categories, so you can go to what best suits you. So, Abby, I thank you so much for introducing and doing some research on this topic, because this is such a common issue that comes up all the time. And so thank you for finding it and having a great conversation with me.
Oh, yeah, thank you for having me.
And listeners, thank you for being in the chat room tonight.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you enjoyed the program. You can find all of our podcasts archived to listen at your convenience at texasconflictcoach.com, or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. You can also become a Facebook fan of Conflict Connections, or Twitter me at TX Conflict Coach.